What is going on? Welcome to the channel. Matt Smith here, and welcome to the debut of a new little show that I'm putting out there where I'm getting out my thoughts on the Avs and the NHL, and we're calling it AvsTalk. It's going to be super straightforward, no frills, super simple. We're just talking hockey here. It has been a little while since I've had the format to do this. If you're familiar with me, if you're not, let me give you a little introduction. I've been working for 104.3 The Fan down in Denver for the last 3 years, and I originally started there doing Avs post-game shows. And what year was that? Well, that was 2022, and it really ended up being a special season, and definitely glad that I was along for the ride and I covered hockey there for 3 years. And it's the sport that I loved the most growing up. There's no doubt about it. I played the most. I was the best at, no doubt. But look, this is a new little venture for me as I transition to more doing digital stuff and kind of putting my own content out there. So thanks for checking it out. And I really can't wait to kind of start this. I've also been doing the Mile High Hockey podcast there with Mike Evans for 3 years now. It was an award-winning podcast. Colorado Broadcasters Association named it the best sports podcast of the year it debuted. And I was the most frequent guest on there with Evans, and had a great time talking it up. And now I just want to kind of put a quarter in the machine and talk some Avs hockey, which is going to be exciting and connecting with hockey fans. Make sure, jump in the comments, miss you guys. Certainly haven't had a chance to really talk, directly with you. And so now I'm glad to do that. And let's talk about what we saw in game one of this season. And I want to get there in just a second, talking about the Avs opening up in Vegas for opening night. But just an overview here of my thoughts on what we're going to see this 24-25 season. Clearly, we all understand the situation with Gabriel Landeskog. Status quo. Much hasn't changed since we last saw Gabe, after he hoisted the cup in 22. We haven't seen him play a hockey game since. And clearly, without him, that's a problem. Now, the difference between this year and the last several with Landeskog specifically is the Avs didn't replace him. They've still got that $7 million kind of sitting there waiting on the shelf for him on long-term injured reserve. And that's the money that they've got to burn right now. If both Nichushkin and Landeskog come back, that opens up a different situation for them. And obviously, they're still waiting for Val Nichushkin. So as it stands, my expectations for Gabriel Landeskog, I wouldn't expect to see him before the turn of the year. If we do, that would surprise me. I'm thinking maybe if there's a chance, March, April. Does anybody out there really think much different? I know we've been hearing he's closer, but there's no definitive timeline yet. They don't want to do that yet. He's not that close. So I'm thinking it's at least going to be until, 2025. And that's a really tough position for them to be in. And not to mention, what does he look like when he comes back? We do not know that yet. Okay. That is very much up in the air. After missing 2 and now 2+ full seasons of NHL hockey, what does this guy look like? And when he went out, he was probably the best version of Landy we'd ever seen. I don't expect him to hit the ground running. I expect him to have to work himself back into elite shape again if he can even get there. And so I feel so horrible for him in all of this because I can only imagine the mental grind and the toll that it's taking on him to have to go through rehab and go through setbacks and not be out there with the boys when you know that you've got the team. And if you were out there, you could be the piece that could put you over the top potentially. And, I'm sure all that rattles around in his head and he's got to fight with that and stay on top of his mental game as well. So my thoughts are certainly with Gabe. There's no question about it. And, I speak for all Avs fans when I say we cannot wait to see you back out there. And unfortunately, until that time, the Avs are at the moment in time kind of waiting. It's the same position that they've been in because they can't get out of that contract and they don't want to. He's their captain, and that means something in the NHL. Wearing the C on the chest, that means something real in the NHL. And so it's not something that you just slap on another guy and woohoo, they've got a captain now. That's not how this works. He is their captain until he's not. It's, period, point blank, black and white stuff right there. So look, that's a disappointment clearly, and we're all rooting for him and can't wait to see him back out in the ice. God willing, he is back out on the ice. Now, with Nichushkin, he is eligible for reinstatement later in November, I believe. And I'll tell you, based upon what we saw out there last night, they need him back ASAP, and they need him back hitting the ground running. And he should be in very good shape by the time he gets here. He's been doing nothing but training and, trying to get his act together and clean his life up. And, I'm sure there will have to be some trust that's built back up, but the The situation remains the same as it did at the end of the last season. They know they need him. They know they need him if they want to win again. And guess what? McKinnon wants to win, and McCarr wants to win, and all these guys want to win. McFarland and Sakic and the whole kit and caboodle, the cast and crew, they want to win, and they know that they have their best chance to do so with Val Nichushkin on the ice. You do not replicate what he gives you. That is why they are willing to be this patient with a guy who, in consecutive years in the playoffs, has kind of bailed on the team because of his own choices, and it sucks. It sucks to have to say that, but he's battling a disease, and it's very unfortunate. And I hope that he, for his sake and for theirs, is ready to go when he comes back, because they really need him if this team is going to do anything this year. And when I say anything, I mean anything. Like, get to the playoffs. Like, they're going to need Nichushkin in the lineup. The team that they are rolling out there right now, they're without essentially their entire second line. And we haven't even gotten, oh, by the way, to Arturi Lehkonen, who's still out with shoulder surgery. Now, he's out with shoulder surgery, but you presume that he's been skating a full go. So once he gets the go ahead, it probably won't be too long till he's reinserted back into the lineup. But he will need to reestablish his rhythm. He'll need to get his hands back, right? I mean, it'll have been a while since he's a full go, stick handling and shooting and all that stuff. And he's been doing some of that, but ramping it up another level. That's a different story. So clearly, we know the big storylines heading into the year. McKinnon, the reigning Hart and Lindsay winner. I mean, what a year he had last year. So now here you go. And you've heard some of these comments in the preseason from Nathan McKinnon kind of talking about how, hey, look, the situation here is not an easy one. Okay. He knows they need more help. He knows how much responsibility is on his shoulders, is on Mikko's shoulders, and Kale's shoulders. They understand that. They understand that there is a lot of responsibility there. And it's not just offensive, it's defensive. And we saw an example of that we'll get into in just a second last night. But, this is a situation for Colorado where, what are you going to be this year? Is this just another year of riding it out? Because right now they don't have much of a choice. They're still missing some significant pieces. They're still needing others that they acquired, like Casey Middlestat, Ross Colton, Miles Wood, those guys to become better versions of themselves than we even saw last year, now that they really should have a full understanding of what the standard and the context and the expectation is when you put on an Avalanche sweater. So you're relying on younger guys to step up now because the Coglianos are gone, the Helms are gone, Jack Johnson's gone. You replace that guy on the back end, although kind of missed his physicality last night. Again, we'll get to that. However, you are the thinnest that you have been since you've been a cup contender, in my opinion. Since the run started back, what was that? 17, 18, right? 18, 19? Whichever year that was, the Calgary series, and then moving on in the San Jose and the Vegas and the Dallas again, and we know what the story has been and what the history is here. But ever since then, I think this is the worst version of them until they prove otherwise to me. And as a result, my expectations are lower for this team right now than they have been. Now, they also have some other guys with some really important seasons, like Alexander Georgiev, their goaltender. This is a make or break year for him. He signed that deal when he got traded for, and this is the last year of that contract. Justus Onanen is right behind him, and Georgiev has to be a little bit more consistent. And despite the fact that he's led the NHL in wins the last two seasons, you're kind of born on third base as a goaltender when you're playing behind Cale Makar and Devon Taves and that defensive core that they have had. Now, even that defensive core is weaker than it's been in a little while, with your third pair being Sam Malinsky and Calvin DeHaan or Gillington, or it depends upon what happens there and what they do with that third pair, but it doesn't look the same as it has in the past. I mean, if it's Gerard and Manson on your second pair, it's not Byram and Jack Johnson on your third pair. That's why you went out and got Casey Middlestat. You made that sacrifice last year. So you are, I think, the worst version of themselves they've been in the last few years. Now, that being said, you still have two of the top three and three of the top 10 to 15 players in the NHL on this team, and probably four of the top 20 or maybe 30 with Devon Taves as well and Mikko Rantanen. I mean, look, this is a team that has a lot of star power still. They should win games. But the problem here is that the division is better. Nashville's better. Chicago's better. Dallas is going to make another run at it. You already know they are. I think St. Louis is better. So we'll see what happens. And then you got Utah, which, oh, by the way, looks solid on opening night. This is a tough task, okay? And in hockey, in the NHL, we talk about American Thanksgiving being a benchmark. And coming into this season on social media, I've kind of said in jest now that if the Avs are in a playoff spot definitively by American Thanksgiving, then we should probably be giving McKinnon the heart again early, because I just don't know if they're going to be able to do that. You've got to survive. It's kind of like Robert Downey Jr. said in Tropic Thunder, just survive, survive, like one of those moments, because you got to hang around 500, because you got plenty of teams that are trying to take the spot that you've had near the top of the division for the last, better part of the last decade at this stage, or half a decade at bare minimum. More than that, though, probably like 8 years. So it's going to be a grind, and you need scoring on almost on a nightly basis from McKinnon and Rantanen. Otherwise, I just don't know if you're going to get enough production. So again, expectations are lower than they have been, and I'm sorry to tell you, Avs fans, it doesn't mean that that I'm out on this team, or that if they do get Nichushkin back or Landeskog back and Lehkonen back, but it's so hard to project that stuff right now and to determine what it might look like in March. Like, if everything goes right and they get those guys back, then the grind that they'll have gone through at the beginning of the season is definitely going to have been worth it, because you got your horses back. I just, and what condition do you get them back in? There's so many unknowns, which is kind of, I think, the last episode of the Mile High Hockey podcast that I was on, that I will ever be on, because of the fan. I said, I do not envy the position that Joe Sakic and Chris McFarland and the rest of the Avalanche front office are in this year, in having to try and build a contender with the restrictions that they have under this hard salary cap in the NHL. I don't envy it. I don't envy it at all. It's going to be a significant challenge, and they're going to do the best they can, but don't expect much. And look at what they rolled out last night. I mean, you got Parker Kelly out there, Ivan, or Ivan, whatever you want to say, whichever one you want to go with, his real name or his nickname. Kovalenko, your second line is Kovalenko and Richie, a 19-year-old and a guy you're just starting out. I don't expect any NHL team, for the most part, would be able to weather it, and probably the Avs will end up doing better than a lot would, because of McKinnon and Rantanen and Drouin, and because of Makar and Taves, and that's at least the hope. But you're still putting a lot of pressure on those guys to have to carry a lot of weight at the beginning of the year, and you're probably going to see a lot of the issues that you've run into the past two seasons, and I think we saw that in Game 1. And with that being said, no other 10 alarm fire storylines to really address. We know what the expectations are for Casey Middlestat this year. He should know what to expect after half a season. Now he had a full summer of training. He comes into this year. He's got to be a productive player. He's got to generate offense for not only himself and for others, because we've seen what this team is in the playoffs without Nazem Kadri, and they need another guy who can drive offense that's not named Nathan McKinnon. And I think during the Winnipeg series, Casey Middlestat, made this team look like they could be the best team in the West. The difference between Middlestat in the Dallas series and the Winnipeg series, look, here's the truth, is that when you get to the Dallas series and McKinnon and Rantanen, and you don't have, you lose Nichushkin, now you're just, you've already got one hand tied behind your back, and now you're having to lose a lot of other pieces, and that's a problem. And it's one that, when you're going up against a playoff caliber team like the Dallas Stars, with the type of talent and the amount of full cohesive lines that they have, and their mixture of youth and veterans, that's tough to overcome, and it proved to be too much, as we saw in the playoffs last year with another second round exit. Now, let's get into last night a little bit. The Avs opened up in Game 1 against Vegas. Now, clearly, this is a disaster night in a lot of ways. The first period, they get the first goal. That was good to see. And you're excited because it's Mikko Rantanen. And Adrian Dater, what was it, yesterday, put out there on his own social media now, and, he's not full-time working for an outlet, but he still does cover the Avs, at least officially, on his own. I think he's on Substack this year. And I've known Dater forever, and Dater has great sources inside of the team, and I respect Dater's, journalistic integrity to the point where he ain't going to put out a story like this if he hasn't heard something about it first. And so he basically said that Mikko's camp, because he was eligible for an extension on July the 1st, Mikko's camp allegedly cut off talks with the Avs. And that, I mean, it kind of makes sense because hockey players specifically kind of do this where they go, hey, season's rolling around. I do not want this on my mind. I do not want to have to be thinking about this. Let's deal with this at the end of the year. So, presumably, if we're going to read the tea leaves, now the Avs have done business in many different ways. They've signed guys mid-year. We saw that with Taves last year where it was a little bit into the season. Maybe that's what ends up happening with Mikko. I'm sure from their perspective, it's not a wonderful time to have to be doling out a massive 8-year contract when you have no idea what's going on with Nichushkin or Landeskog, at least not right now. Like that's a problem. And so Mikko's betting on himself, at least according to Adrian Dater. And if that's the case, well, hell of a debut. I mean, can't ask for much more. Guy had an opening night hat trick, which was great to see. 3 goals clearly on 6 shots. Now, the Avs in that first period, they score instantly. And was that power play goal? No, it wasn't the power play goal. It was just the one-timer off the good zone entry and the kind of board work where Mikko touched it, Drouin touched it, and obviously Rantanen finished it off. But they go up 1, and then within 30 seconds, here comes Vegas down on the other end, and it's Victor Olofsson picking the corner by Georgiev's head because he's not in ideal position, but still a very good shot. And the killer then comes at the end of the first period, and we all know it. They gave up back-to-back goals within 25 seconds of each other. Barbashev and then Stone again, and 2 rush coverage breakdowns. And, on that last one there, McKinnon he never took a look in his side mirror to see if anybody was streaking up weak side. So he just assumed that the play was isolated, in front of him. And then here comes Mark Stone. Because why? Because of course it's Mark Stone whipping up the side and, buries past Georgiev, and there's a 3-1 lead for Vegas. Well, you do a great job in the second period. You're on the power play. Here comes Mikko's second. All right, we got it back to 1, feeling pretty good. Well, within another minute and a half, Zach Whitecloud on another rush breakdown, bam, picks a corner. Georgiev screened just a little bit. I think it was Manson in front of him on that one, but another really good shot from Whitecloud. And you're going, damn, like we just cut this thing back to 1. Okay, well, now 4-2. Middlestat, end of the first period, or end of the second period, rather. Gerard throws it on net, kind of pass off the pads. Middlestat, Johnny on the spot, weak side to put it back in on the rebound. And now you're thinking, okay, great work. Tough. We battled some adversity. It was 3-1, and it was 4-2. Now it's 4-3. There's 2.5 minutes left to go in this second period. Well, then you give Vegas a power play, and they score with 13 seconds left in the second period, and you want to go into the locker room, and you want to, put your foot in the skate sharpener, okay? Like, that's what it feels like at that moment because we just did all of that work. We just did all that work for nothing now. I mean, really? Like, okay, all right, well, now we're down 2. We better score early in this third. Well, guess what they did? Mikko with the Hattie, you're 5-4, feeling great. Another power play, and then Vegas tacks on 3, so... rough night, individually. And I was on with DMAC last night, Kill You With Truth on the stream. Individually, a couple things of note here, certainly. And, I told DMAC, he asked me, he goes, well, what were your expectations for this? And by the way, back with DMAC, Matt and DMAC, there were plenty of you in my comments talking about how, hey, get back with DMAC. You guys always had great chemistry. That's one of my best friends. So I'm definitely going to be doing more with him. And if you haven't checked out his channel, make sure you do so. Kill You With Truth. He's got content on content on content. That's his thing. And kind enough to have me on after, doing his 5 to Go show last night. And one of the things he asked me, he goes, well, were you surprised? Were your expectations? And I go, well, I think you are surprised if you expect this team to be an elite, top tier contender right out of the gate, which I think is the incorrect expectation to have. But I don't have those expectations. So for me, I'm not all that surprised. Now, the way that they lost is unfortunate because they just kept having those defensive breakdowns where it just feels like, hey, man, like that third goal we're talking about with McKinnon, doesn't see Stone. Like that's a 2-second lapse in judgment from the league's MVP. You should be able to survive a 2-second lapse in judgment from the league's MVP, who you're relying on so much offensively every night, but you can't right now. You just can't weather that right now because it's the same thing as it was last year, where every mistake ends up in the back of your net. I think they cleaned some things up defensively as the game went along, but rush coverage was a problem. And overall, I mean, Georgiev ends up giving up 5 goals on 16 shots, completely unacceptable, especially in a make or break year. And he knows that. And I can't imagine that he's feeling very happy about having to get pulled 2 periods into a brand new season. Like, nor was Jared Bednar thrilled about it either. But we kind of turned a blind eye, at least I did, to some weaker preseason performances from Georgiev because what did the Avs go 1-5, and he was in there for quite a bit of that. I kind of turned a blind eye because you're dealing with so many younger guys and guys you're not used to playing with. And as a goaltender, that matters. Chemistry with defensemen matters. And if you don't have Makar out there, and you don't have, Taves out there, then, you're playing, in behind AHL defensemen. So I don't really put a ton of what happens in the preseason on a goalie, but let's just be honest. Like, it was not good. It wasn't good. And so when you've got a situation in the opening game of the year where you just gave up a goal, now all of a sudden it's an odd man rush and McKinnon's late, and now you've got the third man in where it becomes a 3-on-2. Well, it was a 2-on-2, right? And now it becomes an odd man rush out of nowhere. You as a goaltender have to be able to buy your team a save. And that's the one thing with Georgiev where he steps up and plays great in that Winnipeg series. But that's been like, some of us in life kind of like hit that same wall. And I think in sports, can hit that same wall, I should say, that you just keep banging your head up into and you just can't surpass it. Well, in sports, with your ability, it's different because I think for everybody, you have a different ceiling, you have a different capacity as far as what you're capable of physically, giftedly, athletically. And Georgiev is like smashing his head against that spot where it's like some nights I can be good. Some nights I'm going to be a complete liability. I'm going to be a step slow. And he has never just ironed it out to be on one side of the fence or the other. So NHL teams, particularly the Avs, kind of look at him and go, well, there's good enough stuff here where if you can be the good enough version of yourself, well, that's a starting caliber goaltender in the NHL. The problem is he's not that guy nearly consistently enough. And sometimes he goes through good stretches of it, but the elite goaltenders are few and far between. And a lot of nights, you don't need him to be a Vezina caliber guy. And when they won the cup, Darcy Kemper didn't have to be a Vezina caliber goaltender. But the problem is now with less and less talent as time has gone on, well, you're not going to have as high-powered an offense without Nichushkin, Landeskog, and Lehkonen, certainly, as maybe you did in 2022. So you actually might need your goaltender to be a little bit better than that, which is why I think some of this stuff sticks out like a sore thumb, because those mistakes are just too much for this version of the Avs to make up for, right? The margin isn't there. So again, I'm not going to overreact too much to one game, but similar to what I talk about a lot of the time with the Buffs, it's like, is any of that, are any of the problems that they had last night surprising based upon the last 2 years we've seen? I don't think so. And I think Jared Bednar felt, much the same in the post-game presser, in Vegas, kind of talking about, like I said, and I must have said it a million times before I even heard him on the stream with D-Mac, every mistake ended up in the back of their net. And some nights that's going to happen. And I think, it's happening too much for them these last few years. And why? I think they miss Kadri. I think they miss Landeskog on the back check, right? And certainly when you don't have Lehkonen or Nichushkin in that regard, there's just way more pressure on your defensemen because not only do they have to be sound in their own end, but they have to be capable and being, efficient puck movers and generating clean zone exits. And a guy like Kale, it's like you hammer him for one bad zone clear, which ends up in the back of your net. But at the same time, how much are you going to hammer Kale McCarr? I mean, he's been on the ice for, whatever the shift was, 2 minutes. I mean, last night he plays, at 26-15, So this is a tough one for the Avs. This is a tough one for Colorado. Again, not entirely surprising to me. Parker Kelly, I don't know, they need another center. He's, 5 of 6, 5 and 6 in the draw, so I don't know. It's tough. It's tough. It's one of those things where I would just say survive. If you're going to have some of these nights at the beginning of the year without these guys in the lineup, and you're going to have to find a way to get through them. You just are. I'll give you another bright spot. Logan O'Connor rejoining the lineup. I love LOC. LOC is one of my favorite players on the Avs. He's a glue guy that you need. And when he went out last year, they missed him terribly. They missed him terribly, and I was thrilled to see him back in the lineup. Calvin DeHaan, right, former Blackhawk. I'm very familiar with his game. He lacks a physicality that Jack Johnson brought, and I thought on that first Olofsson goal, Johnson knocks Olofsson off the puck there, and DeHaan couldn't, and essentially, it ends up in the back of your net. So there's 3 mistakes that are in the back of your net. What are you going to do? And Vegas goes on, and they tack on 8 opening night, and that's should be a wake-up call for this team. And, Jared Bednar talked about being relentless, et cetera, and dominating. And, it's going to look different when you go up against, a Columbus team that's been stricken by tragedy here on Saturday night. And that's just an awful situation with the Blue Jackets. My thoughts out to the Gaudreau family. Just tears your heart right out of your chest, those situations. And I just feel awful for them. But yeah, against Columbus, it should look different, and then against the Islanders on Monday night at home, it should look different. And then you've got Boston on Wednesday at home, which should be a hell of a game. That's another national one, right? And then Anaheim at home before you head out to the road for a little 3-game Western road trip. So actually, I kind of like, okay, the way the schedule sets up with what is it? 4 of your next games. You're at home all next week. That's huge for a lot of younger guys. I mean, last night, Ivan, Nikolai Kovalenko, right? And even Cal Ritchie. Those guys don't know what NHL hockey's like on a night-to-night basis. Might be better with a softer landing at home. And the crowd's going to be thrilled to see him, and I'm sure they're going to honor McKinnon and his Lindsay and his Hart, and it should be a great environment to at least get some momentum. Then you're on the road, San Jose, at Seattle, at Utah, and it's really not a terrible beginning of the season. Honestly, it might be a saving grace, and to be real with you, I've been so buried in Buff stuff, and between getting fired, my mind has been in a lot of different places. I haven't examined things as closely as I have as far as schedule wise in years past. I'll just be honest with you, and looking at their schedule a little bit more closer with full focus right now. This is the easiest start from a schedule perspective they've had since I can remember. The last few years, they've had some really brutal early road trips, and they've had some stacked schedules against a lot of playoff teams from the year before. They've got some good teams on here and some teams that project to be better, certainly, but they're not, there's no terrible Eastern road trip, and maybe that, I don't know. I mean, there is in November, around Thanksgiving, right around the time that maybe they expect at least Val to have those conversations about getting reinstated, but maybe that ends up being a good thing for younger guys, or it burns them, right? Because you're not on the road, creating the camaraderie, especially with this team. This team's so tightly knit with their culture. Road trips are important, and so they do get one. But I think it is important because you do have 3 younger guys, a little home cooking. Kind of get your feet under you, get the engines going, and then hit the road a little bit, just because of the dynamic of who they are versus having maybe more of a veteran-laden team. So all things told, rough first one, but again, you flush it, you move on. You got Columbus and the Islanders coming in here, and then Boston and Anaheim, and that wraps you up until next Friday, at which point you go on the road, San Jose, Seattle, Utah. So look, thanks for watching the inaugural episode of AvsTalk. Woohoo! So catchy. I spent about all of 3 seconds thinking of the name. The point is, the whole goal of this is I'm literally just putting a quarter in and I'm going. And that's basically what I did here. So I hope you enjoy it. Do me a favor, like and subscribe to the video. It really helps me out. For Buffs fans who are still listening at this stage because you thought you were going to hear about football. You got that one wrong. But for everybody else, I appreciate it. And as fans, I desperately want to know what you guys think in the comments, and talk to me about this team, what you're thinking. If you have any questions, feel free to get at me on all my platforms, and we can definitely bring them up. I think I'm going to start doing some mailbag shows too. So please, throw your questions in there, because I definitely want to connect with you guys, get your questions answered, and kind of get to know everybody along the way, and, develop a little bit of a community here. So again, thanks for watching. I appreciate it. And, I don't necessarily at the moment have like a set schedule for how I want to do this. It might end up being, a semi-weekly thing. Maybe it ends up being a weekly thing. Shoot, maybe it ends up being after every game. You'll just kind of have to wait and find out. At least through the end of it might be more every game-ish, especially on the weekends and stuff with football going on, probably towards the end of football season. But you never know. I got some time on my hands, but certainly keep myself busy still. So I appreciate it, and we'll talk to everybody soon.